What's up everyone, Ben with the BTC Sessions here, and this is your Daily Session.
Hodl that Bitcoin.
Before we jump in, just a couple quick things. Shout out to sponsors of the show, Ledn.io. This is where you can use your Bitcoin for a couple of different services, one of which is to use it as collateral for a Canadian or US dollar loan. The second of which is a Bitcoin savings account where you can earn on your interest on your Bitcoin paid in Bitcoin. For either of those services, check out the link down below. And if you do actually opt for one of these loans, then you will be credited with an additional $50 worth of Bitcoin into your account. And secondly, if you're into Bitcoin, of course, privacy is important, and one of the things I like to use for that is NordVPN. What it does is it can run on your phone or your computer, and it helps hide your IP address, it encrypts your browsing data, and it also has the added benefit of being able to unlock geo-block content. So if you check out the link below, you can get a deal where it's only $3 a month. And with that, let's dive into the news. So this is an article talking about how central banks may be actually contributing and driving demand for Bitcoin, and through a variety of means. In the title here, they're talking about devaluation, but there's some other things as well. So I just want to dive into a couple of the points made here, and this article largely looks at China as one of them, as kind of the litmus test of what can be happening in a variety of places. And so in China, even just this quarter, we've seen a 50% increase in demand for not just Bitcoin, but in general, kind of crypto assets, any cryptocurrencies. And why is that? Well, it could be a couple of different reasons. Number one, demand in China for any sort of asset that allows people to move money out of the country is definitely there. That is because the Chinese government is trying to have capital controls to force people to keep money in the country. That's why you see people from China buying real estate around the world to help with that capital flight. But that's also why you see a huge draw for Bitcoin, because you have a limit of how much in the local currency you can remove from the country, so you need to get it into something that's more liquid that you can move freely without risk of censorship on those transactions. And so Bitcoin tends to fit that bill quite well. Now, secondly, there's also Chinese yuan devaluation, and devaluation is a big thing in a lot of currencies around the world. We've seen it in Venezuela. Argentina is dealing with it a lot right now. But China, particularly as of recently, there's been the trade war, and so there's tariffs placed on China, and to help fight that, China has been actually devaluing their currency. So you print more currency, it's worth less, but this helps. Well, first, it encourages people to spend more and bump up the economy, because if they don't spend it, it's going to go down in value. But secondly, it also decreases the price of some of their goods and encourages people to purchase from China, thus upping their exports. So on a couple fronts here, they're driving demand for an alternative asset that cannot be manipulated like this. Now, on the other side of things, you've got Japan, that has also been quite, their central bank and government has been quite favorable to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, and they're not as fearful of the capital outflows. What they're trying to do is they're trying to clamp down on money laundering. That's their main concern. So this quote here is, they say that they don't worry about the outflows. We're in love with the technology behind it, and we are in touch with the technology community. We promote Bitcoin, but only with controls. And this is where they're talking about trying to clamp down on money laundering for individuals or corporations or whatever. So two different takes. Again, I 100% think this is pretty much on point, that central banks are more or less contributing to their own demise, slowly but surely. It won't take people long to realize that over time, their government issue currency is able to purchase less, and over time, Bitcoin is able to purchase more. And even though it's still early days for Bitcoin and it's volatile as hell, at least that volatility is, for the most part, going in the right direction, whereas the lesser volatility of national currencies is just always pointed downwards. And when it does fall off a cliff, it really falls off a cliff and you get another Venezuela. So yeah, absolutely. Central banks are absolutely pushing demand for Bitcoin, and they may not even realize it. Let's move on here. This is hysterical in a number of ways. So this is Peter Schiff. So Peter Schiff is a famous Bitcoin critic, and he's big into gold. He owns his own gold company, Euro Pacific Capital, and he's always on CNBC and other news sites talking about gold and how it's really the only way to store your wealth. And it's funny because he's the perfect person to see the value in Bitcoin, but he's so far entrenched in his world of gold, and he's got so much incentive to believe that gold will be the only way forward that he's almost blinded to the fact that Bitcoin is a very real possibility that it could more or less replace gold as that next generation's store of value. I know lots of people. I know I run obviously a YouTube channel for Bitcoin, but I know lots of people my age and younger that own Bitcoin. I don't really know. I don't know if I know anyone my age or younger that owns gold. So just to put it in perspective, I do think it's a generational thing. I know a lot of older gold bugs that have eventually understood the promise of Bitcoin and what it looks to solve, and have thus gotten a little bit of Bitcoin, but I haven't seen the other way around. I haven't seen as much of the people that have been hardcore Bitcoin and then gone, maybe gold. I haven't seen as much of that. Anyway, so this was just a summary of a dust up between him and a couple people on Twitter. And so rather than go into the article here, I'll just let you see the actual tweets. So Peter Schiff was basically jabbing Joe Kernan from CNBC, from Squawk Box, essentially saying that he's in love with Bitcoin and it's a ridiculous point of view, and he's talking about how wrong he is about Bitcoin and how right Peter himself is about gold. And then Joe Kernan just replied with just a link to an article and an old video piece from 2012 where Peter Schiff had said that Bitcoin, or not Bitcoin, Peter Schiff had said that gold would be at $5,000 in 2 years. So this was in 2012. He was saying 2014 we'd have $5,000 gold. Clearly that wasn't the case. And this was during the peak. This was back when it was up at $1,700 in 2012. Now, it gets funnier because Tom Lee, who's again often on CNBC, also making hysterically bad calls, but about Bitcoin. It's ridiculous that he's laughing at Peter here because he himself has just made notoriously awful calls, calling for 50K, calling for 25K when it's gone the absolute opposite direction. As we were coming down, even in the middle of the bear market in summer of 2018, he was still making massive guesses, 20K or more. I can't even remember what the calls were, but tens of thousands of dollars for Bitcoin, even as we were in a easily discernible downtrend and bear market. He was calling for just ridiculous numbers. I don't think they will always be ridiculous, but given the state of the market when he was calling it was kind of ridiculous. And so Tom Lee pipes in and says, haha, this is hysterical. And Peter Schiff says, from the guy who had a 50K price target on Bitcoin for year end in 2018. So there's the number I was looking for. My gold forecast came a lot closer than your Bitcoin forecast. Plus, at least gold will eventually hit 5K. Bitcoin will never hit 50K. And I think he's totally wrong here. I shouldn't say totally wrong. I should say I think he's half wrong. I think that, sure, gold could eventually hit 5K, not necessarily because of the value of gold going up, but a mix of inflation and gold valuation and capital flight from maybe older generations moving into gold. But 50K, I would be willing to wager that Bitcoin will hit 50K before gold hits 5K. I don't think that that's at all out of the question. I think that's definitely in the next couple of years easily attainable. And I think that it'll be much more of a trek for gold to get to the 5K range. It just doesn't move as quickly. It's going to take, I think, years to hit that. So regardless, you have two guys here trading punches back and forth, Tom Lee and Peter Schiff, who are just terrible at making calls. And it's just so funny to see. But I think that Peter is more wrong here than Tom Lee. I think just Tom has awful timing, whereas Peter is just so stuck in his world, and he's directly, him believing that gold is not going to be the be-all, end-all of store of value would basically make him realize that his business model is not the best one out there. So anyways, best of luck, Peter. I don't know, but I don't see it panning out. I think this is going to be, I'm sure there's a bunch of, tweet stamps and remind me tweets underneath. That's exactly what I was looking to see. A lot of people want those reminders. Okay, moving on. The White House advisory has issued an advisory to financial institutions and digital payment platforms regarding cryptocurrencies being used for fentanyl purchases. So, oh man, so sick of seeing articles like this. But anyways, so they said that convertible virtual currencies, particularly Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, Ethereum, and Monero, can and have been used for illicit substance purchases on the clear, deep, and dark nets. They basically go on to then use that single bit of information, then ignore any stats regarding how much of that has happened in comparison to other methods of payment, and just go on to fearmonger about fentanyl itself, as opposed to looking at why are we bringing up the payment method necessarily. So again, it's easy for people that don't question articles like this, it's easy to frame it up and say, or I guess I shouldn't blame the article, but rather the advisory put out. For people that don't question that kind of stuff, it's funny because you can just say, at some point or another, people are using this to buy something bad, and then just go into a description of said bad thing, and then people very quickly just equate the monetary instrument to whatever terrible thing you describe. Somebody once used Bitcoin to pay for, child pornography, or somebody once used Bitcoin to pay for a hitman. And now let me tell you about all the awful things about the thing I just talked about, and not reference the currency anymore. And so it just becomes this ridiculous thing where clearly people have used US dollars to buy these types of drugs far more often than Bitcoin or any of the other currencies being used there. It's clearly way more prevalent when you get right down to it. How are people obtaining their drugs? Through dollars. And so this doesn't really speak to anything other than it can be useful as money. But people use money to purchase a lot of things. You could do the same thing with like shoes and cars. Did you know that when I met a drug dealer on the street and he tried to sell me crack cocaine, that he was wearing Nike shoes? Yeah, so it's just an odd and ridiculous argument, but I think it's one that we will continue to see, and especially as they're trying to draft laws around this type of stuff, you're just going to see this kind of garbage again and again, and I think it's important to refute it and just use actual stats, not just say somebody used this to buy some stuff and not compare to other methods of payment. Anyways, moving on. That's my rant on that one. Okay, from something stupid to something a little, I don't know, misinformed. How would you? I don't know my position. Anyways, Andrew Yang, he is a presidential candidate. He's trying to be the Democratic frontrunner. I don't know if he'll get there or not, but he's got his own little following. He's got the Yang Gang. He's also talking about UBI, Universal Basic Income, where everybody would just get a check every month to cover their basics, and, you know, printing money and things of that nature. He's also super into Bitcoin, which seems a little counterintuitive, given that Bitcoin is based on sound monetary policies, and he's talking about printing dollars. That said, some Bitcoiners I know have said, well, why don't we just expedite hyper-Bitcoinization by voting for a guy that will tank the US dollar by printing more every month for people to meet their basic needs. Anyway, so he's talking about trying to implement blockchain for elections to fraud-proof everything and make it easier for people to vote. So here's his quote. "It's ridiculous that in 2020 we're standing in line for hours to vote in antiquated voting booths. It is 100% technically possible to have fraud-proof voting on mobile phones today using the blockchain. This would revolutionize true democracy and increase participation to include all Americans. Those without smartphones could use the legacy system and lines would be very short." So a couple things here. First of all, fraud-proof voting. Okay, a blockchain is only as good as the information put into it. And it's only as good as the network securing it and the, you know, how you're securing it. What is your consensus mechanism? So Bitcoin is not really susceptible to fraud because, one, it uses proof of work, and that proof of network is just so massive that it is very much infeasible to overtake the network and change things for an extended period of time. It would be a hell of a feat, and it would cost billions upon billions of dollars to roll out that kind of an attack. I'm not saying that it couldn't happen. It would surprise the hell out of me at this point if it did. It would have to be an incredibly coordinated effort with people that are funded by billions of dollars. You would essentially have to have countries upon countries coordinating together. And at that point, it's in the best interest of opposing countries to actually support the network and stack some sats and make the effort basically moot. But that's besides the fact. So the proof of work is one thing. And secondly, it's that with Bitcoin, the data on the blockchain is exclusive to the blockchain. It's not referencing anything outside of the Bitcoin blockchain. It's just a record. It's a ledger of who owns what, of what account has what amount, inputs and outputs. That's all it is. But it's not referencing anything external. What he's talking about here is having personal data, some sort of identity fed into the blockchain and then confirmed on the blockchain in the process of voting. And so I guess what would have to happen is that this is besides the point of getting the IDs into the blockchain, but you would confirm who you are I imagine via your private key, which then gives you the credentials to cast a vote. Now, the issue with that is the inputs of getting your identity onto the blockchain, because again, you can put anything on the blockchain. If I made up a name and got it onto the blockchain, then I now have a permanent record of a false person on the blockchain. If you put bullshit into it, you're going to get bullshit out. And so you can, I have never really seen the value in referencing real world items or individuals on a blockchain, because your data is you still need to trust whoever's inputting that data onto the blockchain. And so I think this is a little bit of a case of him maybe not recognizing that fact. Now, speaking to the voting process, as far as how ridiculous it is that this day and age you can't do it remotely. I do agree with that. Like, obviously, if it was as simple as opening up an app that was in some way super secure that you could vote remotely, then sure, it would absolutely be a great thing. And it would definitely increase voter turnout, because it would just be boom and I'm done. But that's just not the case. And so, like, in order for this system to work, first of all, you've got to have a nationwide blockchain setup for people to register their IDs on the blockchain. Secondly, you've got to figure out how you're going to secure that network. And you've also got to figure out how you're going to secure the data going onto the blockchain. And he says that if he gets elected, he's going to enact that. Even if he gets reelected a second time, in 8 years you're going to do that? I don't fucking think so. I just don't see it. I do see the need to make things easier to vote, because he was talking about how when you're voting, it's you only get the extreme points of view, because only the people on the extreme sides of the spectrum tend to turn up to vote in droves, whereas people in the middle that are kind of like, well, I'd prefer this, but that is not as much up my alley, but whatever. You don't get as many of those people, which doesn't give you as clear and concise of a view of the entire country. You more just see the extreme sides of things, and whichever extremity is largest is the one that gets the say. Well, yeah, I would agree with that. So more voting would have a more balanced picture of what people want. But unfortunately, that's not the time we live in, and hopefully we find solutions to that. I just don't think that adding in a blockchain is going to do it. I do think that easier voting can do it, but I don't see blockchain. I don't understand why to shoehorn a blockchain in there. Anyways, I know those last couple of stories were a little bit ranty on my part, but I wanted to touch on them. And with that, I'm gonna wrap up, you guys. Thank you very much for watching. If you're new here, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and share. Be sure to share. I love getting more eyeballs on the content. Other than that, if you want to support the show in another way, you can hit up either the sponsors in links down below. That's Ledn and Nord, both down there. And finally, if you really like what you saw, you can always drop me a Lightning Network tip at my tippin.me page. And with that, I am out. I will see you guys tomorrow for your daily session.